Okay. Well, welcome back. So, today I wanted to talk about America. America and I guess Iran to some degree, and the Iran Quagmire. It's on everyone's minds, everyone's talking about it currently. And yeah, so I wanted to sit down and have a smoke and get into it. Um, now, I don't have a lot to say on it that hasn't already been said on it, to be fair. Um, I think if the US does get involved in Iran, it will be another 20-year war. Um, if there's boots on the ground and they start trying to push the goalposts as they have been currently. Um, and of course, I mean, this is Israel's main objective, isn't it? Because the problem is if US is not involved in the Middle East, or their involvement bypasses this need for, um, I guess, joint Mossad CIA operations in the Middle East, then Israel is very vulnerable. And this is a problem because, well, I mean, firstly, what are they spending all of the US aid tax dollars for if they're not going to then use it to buy the senators to then use in a case like this, for example? Um, and I think they were running out of time. I think the interesting thing is all the trends turn towards, I guess the best way to put it is the decline of US hegemony and the rise of the Asiatic powers. And I think if we're looking at a 5 year sort of trajectory, then a whole lot isn't going to change, right? But when you start hitting that 20, 30 year mark, you're looking at a very curious situation. Um, anyway, let's get this started up, and then we can continue. So this one, I forget what it's called, and I cannot pronounce that. But we're trying a new thing from the tobacconist. So well, let's see how well it smokes. Also, I've got uh, my cigar matches, but even though there's not a lot of wind, I don't think I'm going to be very successful lighting this with that. Yeah, I've got to practice doing that because I'm not very forgive me. It's been a while since I've smoked a good size robusto, and unfortunately, the economic prosperity in Europe is still on the decline. Even more so now with what's happening with Iran. Because here's the problem, right? This affects the. I mean, it's affected LNG. It's affected oil, and guess who's the one who gets the most fucked over by that? Europe, because all all the main dealings that Europe have for their gas and LNG and their oil is coming out of. I mean, it's similar for the rest of the world, isn't it? But we've sanctioned Russia, so we're not even. I mean, even the US has decided now to reverse sanctions on Russia for 30 days. Nice, decent. I don't remember how to smoke these things. But yeah, yeah. So even the US now has revoked sanctions, so India can buy Ural crude. And here's the thing, right? If America, if Israel has a very limited window now to in, integrate the US back into this security operation. If they don't deal with Iran now in a meaningful way, then the problem becomes China is on the rise. The Asiatics are on the rise. The US is pivoting towards security operations on that side of the field, and on top of that, they Iran and China are allies. And what you're going to remember from that is if I mean China is a patient player in the international game, right? So we're not going to see any huge moves from China in this conflict between US and Iran. Okay, and they're not stupid. They're not going to play their hand and start engaging in any way that will upset the US. They've still got time to build. They've still got other like objectives that they want to get to and properly, go for. And I honestly think Taiwan would be top of their list in that regard if they're going to upset the US. I don't think they're going to try and upset the US for anything other than Taiwan, and even then, they're going to be a patient player. They're going to wait until the opportunity is right. So, so 30 years from now, in my opinion, at least, Israel is going to be on the back foot against an. I mean, Iran is already quite a powerful country in the sense of its geography, its location, its population size, and 30 years from now, if the Chinese Iran diplomacy maintains and that relationship grows, and China's on the up foot and US is on the decline, which is kind of the prediction for the next for the I said the near future, the mid future, we're looking at an issue for operations. Israel is a small state, and as the military maxim goes, the the small cannot defend against the large. The big cannot defend against the small. Sorry, the small cannot defend against the big, and that goes for people and countries. Um, in exceptional circumstances, you can manage it, and I mean, Israel is pretty adept at cyber warfare, and they're pretty effective in making a small army pack a big punch. But they're surrounded by enemies, as since the 1940s. Now, Israel has other strategies. I mean, I was reading the other day that there's a large amount. I think oh, I forget the figure, but it's a big. It's either a large minority or a small majority of the Middle Eastern gas that flows through infrastructure pipes to places like Egypt and Syria. Most of it is Israeli mined and Israeli like extracted oil. Sorry, Israeli extracted gas, right? I think it's similar for oil, but I'll have to double check that because it might be a little. There might be some discrepancies there, but at least for energy consumption, ever since this U.S. Israeli military operation, they called it, started, there's been a, a decline and an outright halt in supply to Syria, for their and Egypt was in decline for their energy needs. So they haven't been able to supply themselves with energy because they've been relying on this. So I was gonna. I wanted to kind of make a separate video on Israeli hegemonic energy in the Middle East, um, but to be honest, that would be a very short video if I did. Lovely. I've kind of messed up the burn here though. Let me just correct it. Yeah, whatever. That'll have to do. I've got. Let me use my other one for this. But yeah, so this is a problem. Just like trying to get an even burn is a constant problem of mine. God, you can tell I haven't smoked in a while, which is good for my lungs, but boring for me. But anyway, my point is if if Israel is going to continue to operate in that geographical region, the next 30 years will be the time that they need to start thinking about um, reducing the military capabilities of their neighbors, um, and reducing the capabilities in general, like with this Israeli energy program, where they're mostly supplying Israeli gas to um, neighboring countries. That is a perfect pressure point for leverage. I mean, we've seen how the recent military operations at the Strait of Hormuz and the attacks on like the refinery plants in the Middle East, neighboring countries to Iran, who have security pacts with America, how those have affected crude Brent oil prices, right? Like the per barrel now, I mean, it's fluctuating, but it went from just under 100 to 120 to this as much as OPEC will like that, and they'll enjoy a price hike. It's not sustainable, So this is so the problem is until Israel has a firmer foothold in the way that they can start taking um, taking more control over their neighbors, for example, by uh, cutting their energy if they don't comply. I mean, already they've made. I mean, for them at least, they've made great strides in integrating um, sort of like Saudi and other states in the Middle East into like American security guarantees, which is good for them in the sense of now they have a stronger alliance with them by proxy, right? Um, but the issue with this is now we're seeing, can America make good on these security guarantees? Can America step in and stop Iran from damaging the infrastructure that they rely on for well, they're suffering from Dutch disease over there. They don't have any other methods of making money. It's all oil. All their diversification plans for their finances, aside from the typical, we're going to buy hundreds of millions of pounds worth of London property and dollars worth of US property in these property markets, they don't really have a strong, diverse portfolio in investments. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but the last I saw from these countries, it was all mega structure projects and like mega infrastructure projects that won't make anywhere close to the returns that they've put into it. I mean, the Line City, for example. I mean, this is just is not really. I mean, putting a shiny city in the middle of the desert is very sci-fi television, but it's not really. I mean, there's a reason why it isn't usually done. It's going to be a logistical nightmare at best and an absolute financial ruinous disaster at worst. So, oh, lovely. But so this is the problem. Um, we have this issue um, that you you have a window to do these things before it becomes inviable. I mean, on the decline of the US and the rise of China, there's going to be a point where diplomatically you cannot turn around and start doing military operations in Iran because it's going to be too risky diplomatically. China, if China sees an opportunity that makes sense to them to get involved, they will. And currently, they're doing what they do with Russia, I believe, which is it's a dual use components. So supplying Iran as they do Russia with dual use components that can be used for civil or military usage. And there was a good article in Foreign Affairs, which was talking about the wartime trade during wartime or wartime trade, which postulates that based on how World War II operated, um, key wartime players, even direct adversaries in war, can and will still trade to some degree. We saw this in World War II. Um, and depending on the length and the severity of the war will depend on the type of trade that's done. If it's short-term military operations, um, I mean, the U.S. themselves even lifted Iran, or they turned a blind eye. I forget what they did, but I think they lifted a sanction on Iran, so even Iran could sell oil. It was something along those lines just to get those prices down. So stuff like that, like you've got operational uses for still trading with direct adversaries. Um, and if it's a long drawn out war, then it's going to be like tertiary goods, things that take a long time to convert into wartime materials. But this is, I mean, there's, I mean, I forget the point I was making here, but the US and Iran, I mean, they have an opportunity to, sorry, not the US and Iran, the US and Israel, they have an opportunity to weaken um, Iran, and so I mean, they'll take it. More so because Israel wants that than the US. But an Iran quagmire will speed up the decay of the US, the US economy, the US like fighting power, and US hegemony in the end. One can there we go. It's nice and even now. Finally, one can't fight a forever war and not feel the cost. I mean, if we look at Russia and Ukraine currently, um, Russia as resilient as they are, there is cracks in this operation, which is why having the the crude Ural prices go up, and having sanctions lifted is such a boon to Russia. Although Ukraine did I saw a comment which I really liked, which is Ukraine practiced kinetic sanctions because they striked all the major refinery areas in Russia using their advanced drone warfare, which we see as a potential selling point for Ukraine to the Middle East, given their experience and the ability for them to be able to integrate this knowledge into a defense system against shaheeds and um, other Iranian drone models. Um, and it has to be in a way that's cheap and cheerful. I mean, one issue I keep seeing with the US is that their methods are so expensive. It's like every time you want to intercept a cheaply made drone, you're using like a $1 million missile, and it just doesn't. The financials on that are just not sustainable, and I think we see in the Middle East this very especially for underdog countries, Afghanistan and Central Asian countries in general, like Afghanistan, Iran, etc., a very keen aptitude for guerrilla warfare, for cheap, destructive warfare that's designed to designed to hamper and really just wear down the enemy instead of this big shock and awe tactic that is used so often by the US. Um, and here's the thing. I mean, predictive history touched on it, but shock and awe tactics are not ideal in my opinion. And in his apparently. Um, See, they're nice, and I think the shock and awe tactic is good for if you're doing like short term, like few days based on intelligence, good solid intelligence. You have a senior figure that you want to eliminate. Shock and awe works fine, but shock and awe doesn't work for subduing a whole country, especially a country the size of Iran. I mean, imagine trying shock and awe tactics on China, right? As the U.S. military, it wouldn't work. It wouldn't work. And this is my issue is the US can so easily be drawn into another Afghanistan warfare, and Afghanistan wasn't even as uh, what's the word? How would you say it? Afghanistan wasn't as it wasn't as organized. If we're being honest, it wasn't as big and it wasn't as organized as Iran is. And I mean, Afghanistan is like, oh yeah, you can strike the Taliban, sure, but I mean, take Mexico for example, right? When they got rid of that one of the kingpins, and they talked about the kingpin strategy. The kingpin strategy, taking out senior leaders. Maybe it works for small time organizations. Maybe it works for certain uh, certain very specific issues. But taking out senior leadership, it always just leaves a vacuum for more to rise into that power or another organization to then step in. I mean, when the US left Afghanistan, what happened? The Taliban just walked right into Kabul, and it was a massive like I guess you could say it was a massive embarrassment for the US in regards to their one of their main objectives, which was we neutralized the Taliban. Well, not only did they not neutralize it, Taliban is now the governing body uh, officially in Afghanistan, right? I mean, operations in Iraq. What happened in Iraq? ISIS took over large swathes of rural um, rural areas until eventually, I mean, the government forces couldn't even keep them out of big name cities like Mosul. So I don't know. This is so I definitely think there is a it's almost paradoxical in my opinion because you're using the US before they lose their hegemony to enforce catastrophic blows on your enemies, on your biggest enemies in the Middle East, from an Israeli perspective. But by doing so, you also, you also speed up the time frame in which these um, these powers that you're using lose effectiveness. And I think the trade off here, they've made this trade off because of the US pivot to Asia and China, right? All the talk now is about China. All the talk now is about Taiwan. All the talk now is about the having the fleets in the Pacific, Guam, all of this. And I think this is one of the reasons why this was instigated. Um, and yeah, there's like debate on whether it was Israel or it wasn't, but it makes more sense that it came from Israel than it did from the US. Especially given the US's current standing and position and Donald Trump's current political favor. There's, I don't really see a world in which Donald Trump thought that it would be an a good idea to talk about ending 8 wars, right, and then starting a new one. Um, Especially with how flimsy the those 8 wars that he ended, how flimsy the involvement of the US was in there, and the denials of certain countries to whether they actually had any input in ending these wars. So I think it's interesting that the US has joined this, and it's I mean, the Iranian propaganda Lego propaganda video was quite funny in implying that it was a push from Israel by using the Epstein files, which I think is an interesting concept, and potentially there's something to it. But again, you have to take all propaganda with a big, big pinch of salt. So I really got to remember to actually smoke these while I'm talking and drink my coffee as well. I made a nice mocha pot brew of coffee, and I haven't touched it since sitting down. Deary me. Um, but yeah, anyway, going back to my point on this US US quagmire, so to speak. I think the only way it might make sense for the US is potentially by proxy trying to weaken China's allies. Now, I don't know how strong of a argument that is because realistically, the alliance with China is it's not like see this is the thing as well, right? Alliances in the east currently, by my workings on how they seem to operate compared to the west. Now, I think the east do have a more realist stratagem when dealing with allies. Um, it's not like the old Western mythology, like we saw after World War II, which was this idea of, you know, this very liberal constructivist idea of, we have joint norms and joint values, and thus we are allies, and we're quite strong allies, and we tolerate, we'll rush in and help even if it's to, to some detriment to our own self-interest as a country, because the cooperative universal gains that we get from that is going to be higher than the zero sum game, that people are playing, um, in more realist strategies that are used. And while I do see a merit to this, I think you can get a bit lost in the sauce, so to speak, um, when doing this sort of strategy. There's a lot of times where it's very easy to suddenly start thinking, um, suddenly start making plays that are not, that are very, very, very unideal. Um, and I think now the West, because of how Trump's government is, the at least US versus the West as a whole, their relationships are becoming more realist. I mean, we've seen denials from Maloney about letting America u- use their air bases. She's denied them from using their air bases for the Iran war, and Trump has been saying that, NATO is, he doesn't need to bother with NATO, and etc. So forth. So I think these things are, while we're seeing a rise in this, the East has been operating like this for a while. The alliance between China and Russia is purely one of transactional, um, transactional improvement. So sometimes, China might bear a little more cost in the relationship, in order to make a cultural gain in Russia. You know, earn some good faith, so to speak. But for the most part, China doesn't get involved with its allies if it's going to be of a detriment to themselves, right? And this is the thing, you don't see. I mean, you see North Korean troops on the Ukraine border, fighting for Russia, but you don't see. Oh, actually, there has been unconfirmed reports of, Chinese, but I. That's a good question as to whether that's whether that's an official and also a large number of Chinese or not. That I want to do look into more, a little bit more, because I'm curious about that. But for the most part, China's not sending, platoons of soldiers over to Russia. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but as far as I've seen, I've not seen that. So, there's not like this big mobilization from China to help Russia in that respect. What they do is they do increase trade, and the trade benefits China quite a bit, right? It's not, China's not losing out on these trades. I mean, they get Urals for a fraction of the price that, you would anywhere else, really. Um, Partly because of the position Russia is in with sanctions, etc., so forth. But again, China's not going to make a deal that's going to make them worse off. And this is going to be the same in Iran, right? Unless China has the ability to project power in a way that the US currently has, I don't think they'd make that play. And I think honestly, even when they do get to that level of being, um, strong enough to project power in a way that would, um, that would aid Iran in the same way that America aids Israel in these military operations. I don't know how strong that feeling would be unless it was a good way to strike a decisive blow against a common enemy, for example, right? Or you could argue that could happen in, if like 20 to 30 years, if America's declined enough and they're still operating in the region. But I guess that, I mean, the problem with predicting these things is that there will be 1,000 other variables that come into play. But yeah, I think it's an interesting concept to think about. Anyway, yeah, going back to this Iran Quagmire, it's definitely something I think the Iranians want, and I think this is for twofold. They can more effectively strike, like I was telling about Afghanistan. This needs a bit more heat. Like I was telling about Afghanistan um, and guerrilla warfare, I think they'd have a lot easier time dealing blows to America if they were on their home turf, right? I mean, this is natural. I mean, there's only so much a sleeper cell in U.S. Midlands can do to, strike at the heart of the U.S. You're going to more effectively kill American soldiers if they're already there, and you can booby trap roads. You can, launch shaheeds in your own airspace, where defensive capabilities are going to be a lot more difficult for US to counter. And I think this is and obviously it's not Iran so much as the IRGC. I mean, that's really the people we're talking about here. Um, Unfortunately, the revolution over there led to roughly 50,000 deaths of civilians in what can only be described as massacres, which is it's not it's heartbreaking. Um, and knowing very lightly a few Iranians over here, um, that sort of thing is unthinkable. But it is something that we have to account for, right? And I think the idea of the US to, restart this, I mean, Trump telling tankers, for example, to gain some courage and cross the cross the Strait of Hormuz is, you know, ironic. I mean, where are those U.S. security guarantees in the region? Um, so yeah, I mean, you can't really tell someone to gain some courage and put their life on the line if, I mean, you're not willing to send your own son into the quagmire, you know. And given that I could be going to that region at some point in the future, I'm not gonna turn around and pretend like I'm gonna, you know, run through run through the fucking drone strikes and the shaheeds. Much rather avoid that, to be honest, as would anyone. Um, and it's the same with the rebellion. I mean, no one's going to rebel if they just get executed en masse. This again, with all things, you have to wait for the prime opportunity, like Israel did, dragging in the US into this conflict. There's a time and there's an opportunity where you can capitalize. I think the US were hoping their shock and awe tactics would capitalize the the people, give them that opportunity. But that's not how that works. I mean, shock and awe again is not. It's not a strategy that can check the audio still going. Shock and awe tactic is not a. It's not a strategy that you can really use to get rid of kingpins in this way. I mean, it's an intense sprawling government network. I mean, they have their own uh, intelligence apparatus and you know, a military intelligence industrial complex. Basically, you're not you're not going to just blow that out of the sky from like 500 to 1,000 miles away, right? And even if you do, you can't precision strike every single uh, I want to say SAVAK officer, but they're not SAVAK. Um, you can't strike every single IRGC uh, member and militant and police officer and informant and confidant and ally, and it's just not possible, right? And you don't know how much of the population is also on the side of the Ayatollah, right? There's a lot of, while there's a lot of people who are against, there's also a lot of people for the Ayatollah, and ironically, this whole incident in the Middle East, which is a war, but they call it a special military operation, like someone else we know, Russia and Ukraine. Um, this whole thing is it's brought them together almost. Like there's a lot more support now, I think, from what I've been reading, for the current regime to, or at the very least, the ones who already supported the current regime are supporting it more fervently, and the ones who don't support the regime just want the strikes to stop. I mean, this is when you start targeting schools and most recently desalination plants, which is a big no-no. Is close to a war crime, if not a war crime. Let's be honest, because these are used for people's drinking water. You're not striking the heart of the IRGC when you bomb like a desalination for 30 local villages. Like that's it's a different matter. That taking out the energy grid is gonna realistically kill more, elderly anti-government um, supporters in Iran than it is going to kill IRGC members who a have the wealth, power, and priority to reroute energy to themselves, to set up their own structures, afford to leave areas of great distress, whereas like an average Iranian citizen is not going to have that ability. um, but it really does show a level of desperation now from the US and from Israel to be striking these sorts of targets. I think the real question is if, because it's not a question about if given an off ramp, will Trump take it? I think it's a question of how. Sorry, yeah, that's what I wanted to say. Not, yeah, it's not a question of can Trump have an off ramp. It's a question of if there is an off ramp, will Trump take it, right? And it all depends on his motivation for joining this Israeli special military operation in the first place, right? If there's a strong level of financial incentive, personal financial incentive to stay in. I mean, there's been billions made on the, and I'm not even kidding when I say billions. There's been billions made on the stock markets for war stock because of this. Every time Trump makes an announcement, the internal Trump conglomerate they make a lot of money. Um, Even his own sons make good money on this, and of course they will because they've got the presidency, or they're at least in the house when the president's talking someone else's ear off. So I finally get to this coffee. I keep forgetting about it. Oh, lovely! Got a new mocha pot. Changes the game. I swear to God. Lovely. Anyway, so I think the issue now becomes, will Trump even take an off ramp? And can he even take an off ramp? We see it again. If we look back to Vietnam, for example, the US started off by sending military advisors. Well, they started off by sending advisors, then there was military advisors, then it was military specialists, and then there was this idea that, well, nothing's going to happen unless, you know, we start performing strikes, and they were worried about communist. Well, it was all containment theory at that point. It was containing USSR communism to USSR and not having the whole world turn communist when they're trying to set up a liberal global world order that, you know, uses the dollar as a reserve currency, right? So this all started out in a very, I would say, tangentially similar fashion. I mean, it is a different case, but the escalation proves very similar. It's like all of a sudden, you know, you've got operational specialists there, and then you've got military, and then you've got infantry boots on the ground, and then the more that the US got dragged into that, the harder it was for them to then pull out. And we keep seeing this. The more the US gets involved, I mean, look at the Strait of Hormuz, for example. You know, Hormuz was open. They do this. They do this shock and awe. They blow up a shit ton of Iran. They say, once we've done this, we'll be out. Now the Strait of Hormuz was closed. Now it's speculated that the ships are paying a toll to go through to the IRGC. So now you got 2 million per ship going to the IRGC. You've all of a sudden closed the Strait of Hormuz, then turned it into a money making endeavor to support a regime that you wanted to get out. How do you get out of that? You've now reset the status quo to a worse position. How do you then reverse that? Well, we'll just send boots on the ground for a limited time. You send boots on the ground, I almost guarantee you there's going to be something that happens that is going to, change the dynamics, which will then end up with more boots there, just like in Vietnam. This is what happened in Vietnam. I mean, I'm sure governments can get sucked into the sunk cost fallacy as well. So, and if the US ends up with another Vietnam on their hands, it's going to be a disaster for everything. I think the whole system that's been set up is going to suffer from it. Um, with the US suffering as well. I mean, I think probably Europe is going to be the one that comes out the worst in all of it for some reason. I think that's because Europe doesn't have any sort of grand strategy other than we're going to do carbon footprint reduction policies and, you know, make EVs and all of that. I really do think Europe needs an actual grand strategy, or there was talk about Europe setting up like a unified defense force, in essence, especially in light of US disengagement with Europe and NATO. Um, and if Europe has to pay a tribute to Trump's administration anyway to be a part of this, this sort of security guarantees endeavor, um, that they want to do a restructuring for, Europe probably will be better off designing and making their own unified military. But again, Europe is very strongly bureaucratic, and there will be a lot of bureaucratic elite who are also against the idea of this military setup. um, and that's for multiple reasons. I'm kind of tempted to do another video on that, but um, again, I don't know how long any of these videos ever will be because I just ramble. So, but this is it is it's an issue. I mean, you can't get around it. There's there's no there's no good play for the US in this case, which again is why that loops me back round to, well, how have they got involved in this in the first place? And it's more likely to be personal a personalist reason from, you know, the president and the inner circle there, then it will be from, I mean, for example, I mean, this has been going on for a long time, but the just like the Middle East question, can very closely related is the evangelical question. You know, the question of all the elites in power who over in the US who are evangelical and who believe that you know, the war in the Middle East is a necessary evil, so to speak. Um, Ironically, it's the mark of the Antichrist to be causing such end times to begin. But I mean, they would just tell you to read the Bible. So um, I mean, I've read it. For the most part, I haven't found anything in it that talks about you know, behaving like Antichrist and starting a war in the Middle East. But anyway, that's I guess there's potential for me to be wrong. I don't know. I'm not exactly a avid scholar of the Bible, so then the question becomes: if there is an off ramp, would Trump take it? Um, if you've got evangelicals on one side and then you've got APAC on the other, and you've got big financial gains, and you've got the stock market, you've got a lot of reasons not to disengage, in my opinion, which is more concerning, especially for U.S. ground troops, because ultimately they're the ones who pay the ultimate price. And you know, I mean, I know, you know, very very light acquaintance of mine. I wouldn't say we're close friends or friends, but I do know a man over here who's infantry, or was infantry before he left, and you do pay a price. The soldiers do pay a price, and the price has to be, you know, if it's not in defense of your country, and if it's not for any reason other than uh, you know, keeping money you know, keeping oil prices down, and uh, you know, and to fight for a religion that you don't believe in. Um, and this is the other thing as well. Even these politicians, they wouldn't send their own kin into this. I mean, I remember that that documentary done by what was his name? He did that. He did the 9/11, the controversial 9/11 documentary, and in it he went around to Congress members and other U.S. Senior officials in the government, and asked them to sign their sons up, so put their sons on a form for enlistment, and not one of them did. Which, I mean, I mean, it proves the point that we already know, doesn't it? I mean, and this is the thing, we keep seeing it. We keep seeing it with Afghanistan. We keep seeing it with Iraq. We keep seeing it with Iran now. You know, it's very easy. I mean, Iraq is a good example as well, because that was meant to be well, that was just meant to be a interventionist operation. That wasn't meant to be a full scale war until all of a sudden Netanyahu had told everyone. Well, not just Netanyahu. There was a lot of other people who had told the Western allies and US themselves that you know, Saddam had weapons of mass destruction. But before that, it was there was the operation in against Iraq concerning Kuwait. I think it was Kuwait, that small neighboring country. Anyway, I really need to double check that, but this is the problem. I don't do any research. I just go off the dome from what I remember. It's probably not a good thing. I'm very, I don't know. I'm very much a fan of the my sources. I saw it in a dream type of. If I was ancient like philosopher or uh, war historian, that would be my shtick. I think my source would be, yeah, I had a delusion and I saw that. But yeah, in all seriousness though, from stuff that I've read and from stuff that I've engaged with, these trends keep happening, and I'm not the only one talking about this. I've seen other people talk on these facts, and it's it's concerning because if the trend continues, then again it will be another 20 years in Iran. And the way up is, will will Donald Trump care about the low midterm, or the not the low midterms, but the loss of the midterms enough to then use that as his reason for getting out? Um, I mean, I saw a clip of a journalist who asked him about the proposed national emergency executive that he was preparing for just before the midterms, and instead of on the video, instead of responding to that, he said, how did you find out about that? Which is the most concerning response you can hear when asking that question. Didn't even deny it, didn't even confirm it, just said, I didn't know about that. How did you know about that one? I was like, oh no. So, so this is an issue. Some speculated that Netanyahu was using these military strikes and these wars with Iran, in the nuclear strikes and this current operation now, as a means to declare national emergency in order so that him and his party can stay further in power. Now, I haven't really looked into this that much, so this could be here or nor there, but I think it's interesting to hear similar parallels in Israel and in the US. And rather than hearing denials of this, you get met with, how do you know about that one? Have you been sneaking around the White House? Oh, God. Of course, proper cigar etiquette teaches that you should finish with the cigar once it's halfway done. However, I will not be doing that ever. I've never done that. I'm not a fan of that etiquette, I'll be honest. Oh, I think this one's out of gas. Anyway, I think I'll be calling this video there. I've kind of said everything I want to say. There's more things I want to touch on, but I think I have to get my thoughts organized for that one. Not that my thoughts are very organized for this one, but yeah. So thank you all, and I'll see you for the next one.